Alright, this one's a little scary to film. I want to share the failures that I've had over the past couple of years, starting from around pre-college to where I am currently. Hi, I'm Laura. Welcome to my channel where I talk about my life as a PM, my life working in tech, and advice for anyone else who may be interested in getting into the tech field. Failure is a really taboo subject, and I want to share all my failures in an attempt to normalize the conversation around failure. Everyone's career is a combination of up and down trajectories, not just an exponential curve as much as we'd like to believe it. Of course, my path is much the same, where I've had a lot of up and downs and a lot of learnings. Let me also just quickly set the stage so we know where we're coming to. I'm currently a product manager working at Microsoft in the greater Seattle area, and prior to my full-time job, I've had 3 different internships, one at a startup, one at a medium company, and one at a large company, Microsoft, and I've learned a lot along the way. Let's jump in and talk about my senior year of high school leading up to college. Growing up, it was really instilled in me that to find success, I had to go to an Ivy League institution and receive an Ivy League education. So as any young kid would do, I tied all of my self-worth, intelligence, and overall expectations for myself around getting this Ivy League education. After 14 applications to mostly top 20 schools, 9 months later, and many stressful hours spent waiting, let me be the first to tell you that I have never felt more shame, guilt, anxiety, and devastation than in that moment when I committed to my local state school in Oregon. After this first major failure, I learned about 2 important things. The first thing I learned is that you can try to do everything right and set up a very strict path for yourself, but sometimes life just leads you a different way and has its own way of working things out. The second thing is that it's important to be able to pivot and have different backup plans in case things do go wrong. Here on the topic of pivoting, I really went into college with the expectation that I wanted to go into finance, do investment banking, and make big stacks there. Unfortunately, after some additional research and learning about the day in the life of an investment banker, I panicked. I knew that if I didn't go to a prestigious school, investment banking would be an incredibly tough field, and I also knew that I didn't want to sell my soul to 100+ hour work weeks on Wall Street, if I even got there in the first place. So then I ended up taking a chance on computer science, which I also failed a ton in, but more on that soon. Now, timeline-wise, let's move into my first year in college. Here I was, a happy-go-lucky freshman in college at my local state school. I was in the honors college, I felt really good about myself, and then I stepped into my first computer science class, and all of that quickly dissipated. In that class, people had been around computer science and programming since early high school. They had been going to coding camps over the summer, or they actually been working on their own side projects, and most importantly, they understood the concept of algorithms and data structures and all these other terms that really flew at me within the first couple of weeks of my computer science course. This got me intensely worried, because if I had no idea what was going on in my very first computer science class, how was I ever going to get through a 4-year degree in computer science? I didn't know anything about internships, nor did I know anything about the tech industry. Eventually, after a grueling 10 weeks, I struggled through my first class, did pretty okay in it, and decided that I wanted to continue with computer science. The next 2 quarters were pretty painful as well, and I ended up spending 5 to 10 hours a week in office hours every single week. And by the time spring term rolled around, I had started hearing about people applying for internships and getting internships for the next summer. This is also a moment of acute stress because I had only taken really 1 programming class, and I had no idea how to actually program, and I felt like a complete fraud. I was too afraid to apply for any internships in the first place until a friend finally just convinced me to apply and give it a shot. So I did. I applied for maybe a handful, 5 internships total, and I got a call back from one of them. They scheduled me for an interview, and I was super excited, giddy, and nervous all at the same time. Until I actually got another call saying that my interview had to be canceled and they already filled the internship spot, so I wouldn't be considered for this coming cycle. However, I didn't let that bother me too much, and I continued my job search process for the summer and eventually landed a role to be a coding instructor at a kids tech camp. The same week though that I signed my offer to work at this coding camp is also the same week that I got a new call from that same internship company, and they said, hey, we actually want to interview you, we had a new opening come up, and we think that you might be a good fit. So again, I gave it another shot, and I ended up passing the interview, and I got my very first internship. Over the course of my first year, I think the most important lesson that I learned here was that if you're actually interested and passionate about pursuing something, don't let it go. Never assume that a single closed door is ever the end, and also don't let other people's knowledge or expectations consume your own. If I'd listened to the overall negativity and felt the intense pressure of always comparing myself to other people, I probably would have never made it through my computer science program or never made it past that first year even. With respect to the internship though, whenever you encounter a closed door, it's always best to be cordial, be polite, and you could be reconsidered in the future. So here's where you are on my overall career journey, and we're at my first success point. As a recap, this is my very first internship. I was really excited, but also intensely nervous coming in as a freshman with very little programming knowledge behind me. I spent probably a cumulative amount of a week or even 2 weeks debugging different environment errors. I spent 3 to 4 days debugging a single unit test issue that I just couldn't get. I also spread myself too thin. I took summer courses, which really weren't all that bad, but at the end of the internship, I started spending the actual days during my internship working on homework assignments just due to stress and fatigue at the end of the day. Most importantly though, I think the biggest failure that I had during my internship was that I didn't understand how to work with my manager and mentor and leverage their knowledge to help propel me forward. What I really learned though is that it's important to understand where your limits are and know how to effectively utilize your time. For example, I probably could have effectively utilized my time at my internship a lot better by spending that time to network and understand how to talk with my manager and mentor and utilize a one-on-one efficiently. It probably also would have been better to not do homework during the internship so I could actually focus on my project and utilize, again, that face-to-face interaction time with other coworkers. Alright, now we're a little further along and now I'm 2 years into college. Right off the bat, I got hired as a CS teaching assistant or TA, and this was overall a pretty great experience and I rank it pretty highly on my overall career journey. But this also came with a lot of self-doubt and struggles. Oftentimes there were explanations or concepts that I gave that were just incredibly butchered, and students really felt more confused after talking to me than they did before. On the rare occasion, I would also get frustrated working with a student and trying to explain the same thing over and over in different ways, but none of these ways were sticking or the student just wasn't really paying attention to how I was trying to help them. I TA'd for 2 years total, so I learned a lot in that time span, but I think the major lesson that I want to encapsulate here is that have patience and understand that everyone comes from a different background and everyone learns differently as well. Another mini success during my second year is that I got to attend the Grace Hopper conference in person. It was a fantastic opportunity, but I feel like I didn't utilize it very effectively. I spent all 3 or 4 days at the conference and all of my time just talking to companies because internships were the #1 thing on my mind. To show for it, I got maybe 5 interviews and then a single offer at the end that I ended up rejecting due to location difficulties and issues with pay. Following Grace Hopper, I also spent more time applying to companies and overall applied to over 100 companies outside of Grace Hopper. I got to final round interviews with a few places, got flown out for one of them, and then I just completely bombed my last technical interview and got rejected a few weeks later through phone call. I also failed more technical assessments and code signals and hacker ranks than I can count, and also got ghosted by many more companies. After a string of rejections and a handful of breakdowns, I quickly learned that there's no point in comparing myself to where other people were. I felt a ton of pressure reading subreddits like r/CS majors because I felt like everyone was sharing their success and I had none to show for myself. I don't know why I did that, and it really just took an intense toll on my mental health and the amount of stress that I felt throughout the recruiting process. Everyone is at a slightly different point in their career and everyone has their own set of unique knowledge, skills, and personality. Eventually, after many more interviews, I got to the final round of Microsoft Explore, got accepted, and the world felt like it was no longer on fire for me. For my Explore internship, I was just immensely grateful in the first place to have an internship after a string of companies had canceled internships due to COVID situations. I also had this grand idea that I would be a fantastic software engineer and that the kind of happy ending to my story is that I would graduate and be a software engineer. As I spent more time in my Explore internship though, I worked with a group of amazing PMs and an amazing manager as well, and I actually thought to myself, hey, maybe I like being in PM more. So I talked to my recruiter and I told her that I wanted to come back as a PM full-time. A little bit before my internship was also when I decided to graduate a year early, so I had to go through the whole interviewing process again at the end of my internship to get a full-time offer. I evaluated my options. I realized that PM was probably a better fit for me just due to my skills and where my interests lie, and I talked to my recruiter about this. In the end, she came back telling me that there were actually no new grad PM spots, so I couldn't interview for a PM position, but I could interview for a new grad software engineer position here at Microsoft. Not wanting to bail at what seemed like a dream company, I took the interview and I spent time preparing to be a software engineer. After another interview loop and 4 hours, I found out that I failed. This was another one of those pinnacle, crushing, depressing, and saddening moments next to my Ivy League rejections. As you can see, I kind of fell into a pattern of having a very particular expectation or goal set for myself, and if it didn't happen to meet that goal, then life was kind of over as I knew it, and I have to figure something new out. During this process though, what I really learned is that it's okay to fail. Pick yourself back up, find out how to improve, and then chase your next dream or goal. I took this rejection as a hard redirection and I started pouring more time and effort into recruiting and getting hired as a PM. Now let's move on to my third and final year of college. I started to apply to more and more companies, getting myself into the recruiting cycle and wishing the best for myself, as well as having backup plans for being a PM. I knew that the PM field was pretty competitive, so I still applied to a few software engineering postings just as a backup plan. Just to highlight a few more failures on my end, I failed the Disney final round interview, I failed the Qualtrics second round interview, and I also failed the Google first round APM interview. But through a stroke of luck, I was actually able to re-interview for Microsoft and get a new grad PM spot on a completely different team than the team that I interned on, and I also got another offer from a PM program that I ended up not choosing at this time. What I learned in this whole process is that it's good to keep trying with a backup plan. For example, I had a backup plan to still apply for software engineering roles, but also do keep in mind where your passions and interests lie. I still had the passion and drive to become hired as a new grad PM, so I still took the time and practiced for new grad PM interviews, even though I was getting more software engineering interviews at the same time. Coincidentally though, I felt like I was overall better at PM interviews because that was where most of my strengths lie instead of being in the software engineering realm. So that's my fourth main success and overall peak of my career so far, is becoming a new grad PM here at Microsoft. What I learned though is that breaking into product as a new grad is pretty difficult and you have a lot of competition ahead of you. But again, perseverance is important, and as long as you have that goal, you can work towards it and make strides at every point in your career. Now as a post-grad, I'm encountering a lot of failures at a small scale and successes at a small scale as well, and I'm learning every single day on the job. Every meeting that I join, I learn something new, and I'm also trying to ask more of the dumb questions to really get my basic understanding to be there. Please ask those dumb questions because it'll probably save you a lot of time down the road and can also eliminate confusion from anyone else in the room. That is a wrap on the recap of my failures along the way of my successes. I hope that what I've learned has been helpful and that you'll be able to apply some of these lessons to your career journey as well. I know that my career journey is not very long, being a new grad, and I'm obviously not a seasoned vet in the tech industry, but I still wanted to share this to highlight that as a student, life is pretty rough and there are a lot of ups and downs that you'll experience along the way. I think the most important thing though is that it just takes a single yes to open a new door, and that can take you down a very unexpected journey. I definitely didn't expect to be where I am now when I committed to Oregon State, but I am really glad that I did and that everything worked out in the end. Happy holidays, stay safe, and I'll see you again next week for a brand new video. Bye.